Hadi Nasrallah is a prominent independent commentator and analyst who joins me now to talk about what we saw in the last 7 days in Jenin first and then in Jerusalem. Hadi, thanks for joining us. I'm right in saying that even by the standards of the Israeli occupation, the killing of an American citizen while she was at work for Al Jazeera, covering a confrontation in the camp in Jenin, and then the assault on her funeral was, even by Israeli standards, really something quite extraordinary, wasn't it?
I got to agree, George. It is extraordinary, but it's not shocking at the same time. Whoever follows with the Israeli policies towards Palestinians since the existence of the State of Israel, we've seen nothing but severe oppression, horrible war crimes. I mean, we are talking about a state that still does not recognize that its own Independence Day is basically a Nakba to the Palestinian, a catastrophe where where hundreds of thousands of people were displaced from their own houses. Hundreds of villages were demolished. Today is the anniversary of such day, and we're talking about the same state that executes children leaving their schools a broad daylight when leaving. In West Bank, we're talking about the same state that bombs hospitals, funerals, weddings, schools, churches in Gaza. I don't think this is something that people should be shocked about. I think this is something people should start acting towards, because as we've seen, the recent Israeli violations that happened, they were all being filmed. They were on live TV, and the Israelis knew that everything was being filmed, yet they didn't hesitate to do what they did because they know there won't be any actions. They know there won't be any consequences. There won't be any Western sanctions like what happened with Russia. They know they have this immunity to do whatever they want. This is what's extraordinary, not the Israeli actions.
Well, let's agree that the brutality was shocking but not surprising. But the stupidity of it seems you contest my thesis, and of course you're welcome to. For me, it was an extraordinarily stupid thing that they did. Shooting this young woman, broadcaster of the highest level, working for a country, Qatar, that is in semi-public alliance with them, and holding in her purse an American passport as well as her Palestinian one, and doing it on live TV. This seemed to me an act of extraordinary stupidity. When they had murdered her, they ought to have pulled back their forces from the funeral and allowed it to pass from the point of view of their own self-interest. Why didn't they?
Well, basically, for Israel, they fear many things when it comes to what they call their national security. For them, they knew that the death of Shireen was going to basically start up some sort of, it's going to fire up the spirit of Palestinians to revolute. And they were fearing, for example, that's what it called another uprising, another, I don't know, like riot. They call them riots. But their main goal was to stop any form of Palestinian solidarity on a national level, for it to be represented on the streets, and especially in Jerusalem, which is a very delicate place for the Zionist regime. They wanted to stop any representation of the Palestinian flag, any unity between Palestinian Muslims and Christians, for them to walk together in Jerusalem, showing the world that they are one hand against one occupation. They didn't want to see that. And of course, as per usual, when Israelis are involved with their military in places where Palestinians are doing their own ceremonies, things gonna escalate and things gonna become violent from the Israeli side, because once they see the way they treat Palestinians, for example, when they see a flag being raised, they do not go ahead and just take it down. They start the violence, and the Palestinians have every right to retaliate to that violence, which of course the Israelis will respond even harsher, and that's how things are going to be every time.
I tread delicately into this next part of the interview. I have the highest respect for Pope Francis. This woman was a Roman Catholic, and from what I have seen, the Vatican, which has been so active on Ukraine, has had nothing meaningful to say about the slaughter of a co-religionist and the desecration of her funeral. How does that make you feel?
I mean, it makes me feel angry as everyone else in our region because the way the Palestinian Christians have been treated and the way they've been neglected by a lot of mainly the Christian Zionists in the West, which is horrific for me to see every time. For example, last year in Gaza, when Palestinians were being bombed indiscriminately, a church was bombed by Israel, and barely anyone spoke about it. I'm pretty sure everyone listening to us right now, many of them don't even know that a church has been bombed or affected, a monastery has been severely affected, and an orphanage for the Catholics, for the Latin Church, has been affected, and no one ever heard of it. So the global silence is heartbreaking when it comes to Palestinian Christians. And for Shireen to die that way in this disgusting, brutal attack by the Israelis against journalism, and she's a Christian with her casket with a crucifix on it, and that almost fell from the hands of people, both Christians and Muslims, and not a word from the Vatican. This is, like I'm going to say, it's not surprising, but it's heartbreaking.
It's surprising to me. Christian Zionism is a thing, particularly in the United States, but also in Europe and also in the United Kingdom. But the Pope, and especially this Pope, might have been expected. And I don't ask you to comment on it. You have no responsibility for the Pope, but I do. It is not just inexcusable, it is inexplicable that a Pope so political as a Pope from Argentina could remain silent, absolutely silent, in the face of these atrocities is to me as difficult to swallow as it is inexplicable. Now, something you can answer. What's likely to happen next? Are we going to see a de-escalation, or are we going to see an escalation? And what form would an escalation, in any case, take when the Arab regimes are completely silent and powerless, or actually collaborating with Israel, and when the firepower available on both sides is so grossly disadvantageous for the Palestinians?
Basically, I'm going to start by saying that Shireen's death right now is added to a long list of basically hard times in the Palestinian struggle. So I think that the entire Palestinian struggle has been escalating since it began in the late 40s. It never ended, it never stopped. But what happens is a bit of ceasefire, let's call it. Shireen's death is not going to escalate things to a war or to, let's say, a third intifada, but it will flame up the future revolutions in the region. Israel's trying to de-escalate the situation by saying that they offered joint investigations with the Palestinians, but days ago, Haaretz, an Israeli newspaper, they denied that. They said that the Israelis said that, but they did not even inform the Palestinians. So even Israel, when they're trying to publicly or show the world that they're trying to de-escalate, they're not doing it they're not asking the Palestinians that they're doing that. Either way, I don't see any form of escalations in the meantime, but I see that there's going to be consequences. If it's not on a global level, it's going to be on a local level by the Palestinians. So the recent attacks that have been happening in Palestine against the Israeli settlers, I think those going to escalate, and Shireen's death is going to make that even stronger for a lot of, it's another reason added for why Palestinians are going to do that now.
And where does all this leave? I don't know if you can answer this. I don't know where you are. And in the Arab world, these things matter. Where does all this leave the decrepit long ago unmandated so-called political leadership of the so-called Palestine National Authority. We have a president who's been there far too long. He was old when I knew him 35 years ago. God knows what age he is now. He long ago ran out of mandate. The political leadership of the Palestinian people has never, in my experience, going back to the mid-1970s, been more palsied than it is today. Where do these events leave it?
I think the Palestinian Authority is the biggest gift to the Israeli government because basically their job, they were placed there to de-escalate any Palestinian anger. They were put there to basically do some of Israel's dirty work, like killing Bannat, a Palestinian activist, months ago, or I think it was last year. That's their job. So now regarding Shireen, their response was kind of acceptable because they finally condemned Israeli actions, but I don't see them working for any consequences or asking for global response to what the Israelis did. And even if they did, I don't think there's going to be any response because they don't follow up with the situation, just like during the war in Gaza. So what I see is a continuous Palestinian anger towards their own representative, which most of them believe it's not legitimate because they did not choose for them to represent them. That's not going to lead to peace. I'm going to tell you that. I don't know where it's going to lead, but it's not going to lead to any form of peace or de-escalation.
Hadi Nasrallah, thank you for joining us on the terrible events in occupied Palestine. Much obliged to you.